Thank you for coming along to a 3:20 session at the end of a long day, to a presentation titled like this, which wasn't my first choice, and it's pretty dry. I'm James Naylor. I manage the media systems and the publishing systems at Hearst magazines in the UK. And if you don't know who Hearst are, we're part of the global Hearst Corporation. We publish 19 print brands in the UK and 6 digital pure plays, including Cosmopolitan, Good Housekeeping, Esquire, Elle, you name it, we publish it. We take pride, I've not been told to say this, but we take pride in creating brilliant, well-crafted and trusted content. And I manage the system that they do that in. And I want to talk a little bit about our journey over the last 8 years in managing that change from a purely print company to something a bit more multi-platform. My original title, as I proposed it to the PPA, is "This isn't what I got into journalism for." This is quite a common refrain when I'm talking to my teams. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the challenges that I've faced along with my team when moving our brands and people who've worked in the same way for decades into something a bit more modern to respond to our readers' needs and requirements. And we currently produce about 2,500 print articles every month, 10,000 digital. So a little bit of history. I've worked at Hearst for 10 years, and 8 of those 10 years we've used a system called censhare to manage our content. Censhare is both our asset management and our workflow tool, which is quite unique, especially in the UK, or it was at the time, to have both systems in one. It's given us enormous flexibility, but also adds a bit of complexity to our journalists and editors' work in the way that they do things. It's the first of many changes that I was involved in when I joined Hearst, and it's certainly not the last. It's been constant change ever since. To minimise the disruption of putting in a system like this, it went into move out of the kind of traditional repro workflow, where we kind of did the work and then gave it to somebody else to do all of the work, and then they gave it back to us for us to say, actually, no, can you change that yellow a bit? And that kind of went round and round and round. And those days came to an end fairly quickly after we put censhare in and we could manage all of that content ourselves. But to make that transition easy, we mirrored the workflows and the processes that they were already used to make that transition much more simple. And it meant that we were really successful in doing that, pulling all of the magazines really quickly onto censhare, managing all of that content, never missing a page printed, while maintaining the quality that we used to have with our repro houses. But we started to outgrow this kind of traditional paradigm of issues. I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that that's put us in because we're still using these old practices. So the first problem is that people in our business generally tend to write for an issue. And then once that issue's finished, after press day, when all the panic's over, that issue's forgotten about, goes to press, and all the content is done because that issue is finished. It's a pretty kind of standard container, an issue. It's very easy to understand, very traditional, and everybody works with it. But it tends to limit your thinking, or it has tended to limit our thinking about sharing, reuse, and once the issue's gone, everyone's kind of moved on. They're on to the next issue, and weeklies and monthlies, the process is the same. So that was the first problem that we're trying to solve. The second is that people love their tools. Hate's a strong word, but I really dislike Microsoft Word. It's completely bloated, unusable for transferring content between systems. It's not easily structured, but everybody uses it. It's very difficult to move people away from using Microsoft Word because everybody uses it to transform. That put us in some really tricky times, which I'll come on to later. The third problem is styling. This is an example of how our teams work between the kind of the writers, the subs, and the art layout teams. That they'll write in their article head in brackets, It's very logical, and it worked, and it has worked forever. But it means that when that article goes onto the page, somebody has to go and delete that word head and the space and the colon, and it doesn't always happen. And if we want to reuse that content, the person that's reusing it has to do the same thing, and again and again and again. And all of the teams operated slightly differently. So if you worked for Good Housekeeping and then you go to work on L, they might have a different syntax, a different language. And so sharing that content across the company became really difficult too. A linked problem with this is that people tend to write for features. So if you think of a magazine article, they would write the intro, the style, the box copy, the pull-out quotes, the recipe, the picture captions, all in one long document, one long Word document. So again, if we wanted to reuse those constituent parts, as we're starting to want to, in the kind of this age of snackable content and shareable content, pulling those out of the constituent bits is just extra work, it's just inefficient. And third, content was undiscoverable, a needle in a haystack problem. When you're working on an issue, you know that feature one is your kind of main feature, which is about your cover star. And the next month, feature one is about your cover star for that issue. But when you go back into looking at the archives and trying to find content, everything being called feature one or health and beauty is not very practical and not very discoverable for reuse. I'm a bit of a geek. I work in systems and tech. And the fact that I couldn't respond to a request for all of the travel content over the last 3 months over these 6 magazines broke my heart, because I know that the system that we've got is a massive database that I can control, and we're using it in a very limited fashion. So a couple of years ago, we set to change that. And this stock photo psychopath is a great indication of what we were trying to do. So just to summarize, people weren't writing articles, they were writing words for pages. The articles and the structures weren't optimized for digital or social, and we couldn't easily transfer that content. The writers wouldn't style because there was no need for them to do that, which led us into a vicious circle that people wouldn't reuse content because it wasn't styled, and you can imagine where that goes. And we couldn't easily find what we had written. So our first step, and as the screenshot shows, is to write structured articles. So this is my attempt to remove Word from the workflow, and we successfully did it. Our first attempt was to do something a bit more web-based. It looked like a web form. There's a box for the headline, there's a box for the intro, there's a box for the body copy. For me, this is a beautiful kind of encapsulation of what an article should look like. It worked really well for transferring and structure and making people write as articles, but they hated it. The writers hated it because it's too restrictive. People didn't want to write in a web form. They wanted to write in a big, long Word document that went on and on forever. I thought this would be the easiest, but it didn't really work. But we learned a lot from it. And our second step was to give them a much more basic white box to write into. And you can't see very easily on here, but up at the top of here, we've got some styling tags. So this is the intro, this is the headline, this is the body copy, and all of that text is tagged so that when we pull it onto page, it matches up with the styling on page and automatically formats. And if we transfer this content to our web CMSs, it's automatically styled and structured according to the website styling, without anybody having to do anything, apart from the initial setup, of course. It's about efficiency and taking the processes out that are inefficient and require extra people. This was much more popular. The only problem with this is that it's easier for people to make mistakes, so this takes a lot more training and a lot more supporting and hand-holding, but it's still better than what we had. And both of these tools are within our workflow system, so that everything's managed, everything's backed up, everything's stored. This is the most boring slide of the lot, at least I think it was anyway. But probably one of the things that was the most, or will be the most transformative, is that we're enforcing structure and categorization on the people that are writing the content. So the business has come up with a set of content types that they want to track and manage, And every editor, every writer who works inside of censhare has to put a categorization across against their article. Doesn't mean they put the right one, but they have to put something. So this answers my question of, show me all columnists over the last 6 months across all of our titles. Really quick way of finding all of our content. And what that's doing is promoting reuse. And it's a living, breathing list that will change according to business requirements. So it's not a technical thing that I'm putting in because I think it's a good thing. It's responding to business requirements to find this content and reuse it. And it's already led to new product coming out of content that we already have written just in the last 6 months. The third step is truly structured content. This is the bit that I'm most excited about, if you could be excited about truly structured content. I don't know if any of you saw the Good Housekeeping presentation earlier, but I've worked really closely with them to take their massive history of content of product reviews, which were in Excel documents and shoeboxes, and put it into our workflow system in a way that's structured so that everything is searchable, findable, and sortable in a database, which is what we have. Because we've been able to do this, they've been able to link up with their website. They write once in here. This content then can be placed on page automatically, dramatically simplifying the page creation process. And they also, in their web CMS, can query censhare to pull all of this content out by searching for it by their category, and then it automatically pulls the information that's required for the web CMSs. It's the first example of really closely integrating our editorial teams with the web processes, and it's kind of it's been transformative within the offices of Good Housekeeping. This structure is the first of many, so things like recipes and all of that. This is probably not news to most people, but for an editorial team, it's kind of dramatically different. So the finished product, that's what the lasagna is meant to refer to. We've evolved the use of our systems to, instead of managing pages in a print production workflow, to truly managing content. We manage assets to create a library of content that's discoverable, reusable, and transferable across multi-platform. And we've done it all while using the same system that we use to manage print without breaking any of the print workflows. Again, our print is where most of the money is still coming from, so we can't break that, and we didn't want to invent a new system to bolt on the top. We've linked up our editorial teams with our other web CMS platforms and brought the kind of time to market and the time of content to our readers to be much closer. It hasn't been easy. There's been a lot of user education. This is a cultural change, not a technical one. Most of my work is about culture change. And kind of the opening slide of this isn't what I got into journalism for was kind of been, it's a common refrain at the start of this process where I would show people that form and they say, this isn't what I got into journalism to write articles, not to put numbers into forms. But this is what we're responding to, that the readers want, and as a business we need to do, to get content out to them across multiple platforms. And not everyone's doing everything correctly. And it's really difficult for me to manage that. So we're working really closely with empowered people within the teams themselves to make sure that they're policing the work. And as we're bringing the editorial and the print teams closer, they're noticing when people down the chain aren't doing the right things at the right time. And it's starting to form a really virtuous circle of embedding within the culture that this is how we do it and this is why we do it. And it's just moving the work to the right person at the right time, and it benefits the entire team. It's not extra work, and that's kind of half of my argument about making the writers do this categorization and styling and tagging, is that it's just doing the right thing at the right time for their brand. I hope that gives you a journey, an insight into our journey so far. So it's 8 years in. Everything's better with cake, as Lindsay Nicholson said, and it truly is. So thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic, incredibly clear. And you're suggesting, sir, that metadata is the new design direction?
Yes.
I am out of the job.
No, 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 no,
Oh,
no.
no, in
No,
a new
no.
job.
It's a different job. It's a different job.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. There will be questions, I'm sure. Yes, sir.
I'm David Moyes from DC Thompson. I just wondered, you obviously will have a huge back catalogue of material.
Yeah.
Have you tried to retrofit that to your new system, or have you just said, to hell with it, let's go and let's just go forward?
We focused on forward, but going backwards is definitely something that we're looking at because, say, we have 6 or 7 years of unstructured content that's still valuable, but it's whether the cost to transform that into something we can use is of benefit. We haven't made that decision yet, but I'm sure we'll look at it.
Does your database have the flexibility to have multiple design directions of the same content?
Yes.
So if you're publishing to print, these fields will produce the text in this form.
Yeah.
If you're publishing to web in this form, and if you're publishing to mobile, this form.
Yeah, that's it. So that style document where the styling was at the top right and they choose the headline, it doesn't describe a style, it describes whatever style is used on the output for that platform.
Is there a risk then that you end up with so many products that then looking so very, very similar?
No, because the concept is that the output can look very different, and the time spent on creating the templates that take those styles into account is much more valuable. And it takes out the drudgery of then styling by hand all of the text. And I think that the value is in creating beautiful designs, not in repeating those beautiful designs.
Any more questions for James? This is a one-off opportunity. You've got the brains behind one of the better publishing operations in this country. It's now right in front of you. You can interrogate it. You can ask him anything you like, within reason.
Can I ask another one then?
Yeah.
See, if you write a bit of content and it's primarily for print, and then you tweak a version for your website,
Yeah.
you tweak a version for your mobile offering and future platforms, does that mean you have multiple versions in your system, or do you have one that variants sometimes?
Yeah, it's pretty much that. We've taken the approach that the master stays as the master, and that the output determines how it's subbed. So it might get subbed slightly differently before it's published on web, and it will be subbed very differently as it goes on print for space reasons. We're all looking to bring those back in so that they're all stored together, but at the moment it's kind of store and output, and we'll bring those back in later.
Do you oblige your journalists then? So, instead of writing an article, you do oblige your journalists to supply a short form headline, a long form headline, a short deck, a long deck, 3 bullet points, a synopsis,
No.
a short form, a long form, a video, a podcast, and a box plot.
Not yet.
You choose which one.
Not yet. Not yet. But I think, yeah. Well, the aim is that the writer does what they do best, and they write. And at the moment, our subs do what they do best, which is subbing for output. And so, at the moment, that flow still works, and that the guys who publish on the web know about SEO and know how to change the wording, and they know how to format content for that platform. So those skills are still valuable and still used in that process.
Do you have separate teams producing content for web and print, or is it the same team doing both?
We have both at the moment, and some are separate and some are coming closer together.
Is one better than the other from your point of view?
I think it's better when they're all together. I think it's better when they're all together.
It's better when they're all together?
Yeah.
All right, because that's very different to Hearst in America, isn't it?
Uh,
Their teams are very separate.
yes.
Completely separate.
Yeah. It is different.
It's just different.
Yeah. I don't make those calls. I respond to business needs.
Of course. All right, any more questions?